get up the courage to open my eyes. I look up, and right 6 inches, 7 inches from my face, there is this huge head. I'm taking in all of these details because that's the only thing I can do. I'm frozen. I can't move. I see it's a very feminine face, but there was a brow ridge, conical head, hair kind of on the cheeks, full lips, wide, flat nose.
Hey, Ken. Thanks for being here with us.
Hey, you're very welcome.
We'd been talking a little bit on social media, I believe, or maybe you sent us an email. I can't remember. Sounds like you had a Bigfoot encounter when you were younger. Is that right?
Yeah, my first encounter was at about 6 years old, maybe 7.
Okay. And you've had others since then?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, all up until I was about roughly 18 years old.
Okay. Did these all happen in the same area? The same?
Yeah.
Okay. And you said this is in northeastern Ohio, right?
Yes.
Okay.
As far north and as far east as you can go, it's the upper right-hand corner of the state, town called Conneaut.
I know exactly where that's at. You actually had these encounters in Conneaut, Ohio.
Yes.
My son goes there every year for a World War II reenactment that they're
Oh
ready.
yeah, D-Day. They just have it. D-Day happens every year right around my mom's birthday.
Okay. Have you been to that before?
Nice.
Yeah, I was at the very first one. We were just up for my mom's birthday this past weekend, and they were having it, but you have to get tickets.
Yeah.
They're free, but you have to get tickets because it's become so big.
It's huge. They get the guys out there, the Germans and the Italians,
Mhm.
and there's a whole bunch of different guys who are in these World War II reenacting groups who are in, there's American reenacting, there's World War II, I'm sorry, there's German reenacting, which my son's in the German one. There's Italian guys, and they take this seriously. They own the
Oh,
vehicles.
they do.
They have they fly planes over top of the lake there, Lake Erie there at the beach, and drop pretend bombs when the tanks are
Right.
out there and the boats come from the water. It's like a real deal. It's really cool if you're into that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. I think they chose Conneaut because the bluffs, is what we call it, the bluffs. They kind of go like down and then flatten out and then go down and then flatten out and then go down and flatten out onto the beach. But it's very similar. I think that's one of the only beaches on the Great Lakes that is almost identical to Omaha Beach.
Okay.
So where the Germans had their gun nests, and then the beach that they came up, the amount of space between the water and where the hill starts to go up is roughly the same.
So yeah, when we were there for my son's event, I told my wife, I was like, well, I wouldn't mind going hiking and Bigfooting around here, but I really didn't think there was much going on around Conneaut. I thought maybe you had to go more south into Ohio or over to Pennsylvania. It's kind of weird that you would think there'd be sightings there, but that's how they happen. They happen in areas that you really don't expect them to sometimes, I guess.
Oh yeah.
Why don't you take us into your first one and tell us what was going on, what happened, and what you saw?
Well, before my first encounter, we have to go back maybe a year, year and a half before that to like 1970, I believe 1978, late 78, early 79. My brother was born in April of 78. And at the time we had left a house. We lived in a cottage down by the lake. And we had left that. So we were staying with my grandmother. After my grandfather died, my grandmother bought a house virtually, like she was on this side of the street. There were houses across the street. And then behind those, which was on another street, that's where she bought the house after my grandfather passed away. So we were living there when my brother was born. Then we bought a house that was right next to the Conrail tracks. And if you've been to Conneaut, you know that we are railroad tracks galore. There are 3 main railways. There's the Norfolk and Southern, which used to be Norfolk and Western, which used to be the Nickel Plate Railroad. Norfolk and Southern is now famous for the derailment in Ohio a couple of years ago. Then there's the Conrail tracks. And then we have the Bessemer in Lake Erie, which brings coal from like West Virginia, Maryland, southern Pennsylvania up to the ore boats on the lake. The ore boats come from around the Great Lakes with iron ore down so that the trains can ship that back down to Pittsburgh. So we bought a house that was right next to the Conrail tracks. And if you walked through the backyard, you went through the woods down a hill, and you were at the Bessemer tracks. You were at the creek. You were at the Conneaut Creek. At the time, I would get up in the middle of the night and go to the bathroom. Now, I thought I was having dreams. But when I took a psych class, I always thought it was weird. I thought I was the only one, but my psych teacher at the time had confirmed that it's a very common thing to have what he called the pee-pee dream, where if you go to the bathroom while you're in a dream, you start to go to the bathroom, you either wake up or you wet the bed. My sheets were dry. I was never a bedwetter. So, and I must have actually been getting up to go downstairs to go to the bathroom. But there were always these eyes looking at me through the windows. They were like peeking in from the top of the windows. And if I remember, based on what my parents bought or said they needed for curtain size, on the inside of the house, they were about 82-inch windows, which I guess is standard in a lot of houses. So add another foot or so. That's what, 82, 72, 6 feet. So that's almost 7 feet to the top of the window. You're looking at 8.5, maybe 9 feet with the foundation standing in the driveway. So something was looking through the top of the window, probably about 8.5 feet tall. I remember seeing eyes, and I got as a little kid, I got scared. I'd say paranoid now, but as a little kid, I'm like, oh my gosh, these things are looking at me. They're monsters. What am I going to do? So I would look for the corner in whatever room of the house I was in that was seen by the least amount of windows, because these things were looking at me. I had this weird feeling. I used to sit with my back to the window facing the woods, going down into the woods for dinner in the dining room. I moved seats so that my back was against the wall, because a few times a day for lunches, for shift changes, the dock company would sound a siren to let everybody know it's a shift change, it's lunch, come back from lunch, whatever. And it was the typical kind of Bigfoot howl sounding siren. At the time, I didn't know. I didn't understand why this scared me so much. That siren sent chills. I would get goosebumps. Now, this was all well before I saw what many people who are into or who are interested in cryptids, in Bigfoot, in aliens, in the Loch Ness Monster, whatever, their first experience, their first viewing of the Patterson Gimlin film was In Search of with Leonard Nimoy. I had not seen this yet. I was only maybe 5 years old when this was happening. This peaking was happening. So fast forward to the summer, had to be summer of 1980, 1981 maybe, because in the fall of 81, the shed that I'll talk about burned down. It may or may not have been intentional by my father, because kids were playing in it and it wasn't safe. So he may have, flicked the cigarette butt in there with some gasoline on the floor or something. That was like 40 years ago. Nobody cares. We're camping out in the side yard. I have some friends over. We're camping out. It's the early 80s. People freak out when I say that, but it was the early 80s. We did stuff like that. All through the 80s, my friends and I went camping by ourselves deep into the woods with no adult supervision at all. So my dad gets up, goes in the house to go to sleep. He's not sleeping on the ground. He's not stupid. So I'm watching the campfire. It dies down. It's got to be 1, 2 in the morning. My friends are all asleep. I'm wide awake, and I think, there's that shed. I'm not allowed to play in the shed. I get yelled at if I get caught, but this is 2 in the morning. No one's around. No one's awake to see me. I'm going to play in the shed. Now the shed was maybe just, and I write, so I try to be descriptive because for me it helps give me like that mental picture of what I'm seeing. The shed was maybe 8 by 8. I don't think it was 10 by 10. It wasn't that big. 8 by 8, 6 by 6, something like that. Now the back of the shed was facing north towards the Conrail tracks. There was a window facing west towards the house in the street, a window facing east down towards the creek, and then it didn't have a door, but the doorway was facing south toward the neighbor's yard. Why it was positioned that way, I have no idea. It was broken down, wood was rotting, there were nails everywhere, but it was the coolest thing in the world to like a 5, 6 year old kid. I go into it, and then it becomes the OR from MASH. It becomes the Starship Enterprise, the original, because Next Generation wasn't out yet. It was the ships from Battlestar Galactica. It was the ship from the fighters from Buck Rogers. I think it was a TARDIS at one point, because at that time on PBS I was watching the Fourth Doctor, Tom Baker, and Doctor Who. So it was a TARDIS, and I'm like, oh, this is so cool. I'm playing, I'm letting my imagination go, I'm having a great time. And because I was doing that for years, I thought that I imagined the whole thing, but the memories are just I'm putting things together later on in life going, yeah, I wasn't imagining that. So I hear a crack coming from the woods. I get scared. I shrink up. I go into the northeasternmost corner of that shed, because that's away from it's coming from the east. So if somebody looks in the window, they're not going to see me if I was hiding in like another corner. I didn't even think that there's no door on this thing. The doorway's wide open. And if they came from the south, they're going to see me right away. But I huddled down in this corner. My head was basically like right above me was the window, kind of off a few inches. And I closed my eyes as tight as I could. And I'm hunkered down. Eyes are closed. I hear footsteps, big, heavy footsteps. They stop right outside the window. Wait a couple heartbeats. And then I hear a chuffing noise, like horses make when they breathe out and their lips go, that kind of a sound. I get up the courage to open my eyes. I look up, and right 6 inches, 7 inches from my face, there is this huge head. And as I looked up, I'm taking in all of these details, because that's the only thing I can do. I'm frozen. I can't move. I see it's a very feminine face. I don't know, like, really how, like certain other podcasters say, we're the experts with, Bigfoot in the garage studying these things. But it was a feminine face. It was a female face. I knew that maybe it was softer features, but there was a brow ridge, conical head, hair kind of on the cheeks, like where a lot of women would put blush, but not much more. Big, full lips, wide flat nose. The hair was very dark, but it was streaked with silver. There were silver streaks all through it. When the moon hit it just right, it shined off the streaks in the hair. I don't know if it was white or silver. It wasn't a flat gray. They were very shiny, which makes me think they were silver hairs. And the eyes, like, they were this kind of milk chocolate, kind of a lighter milk chocolate color is the only way I can describe it. Almost, if you see the Bigfoot behind me, the kind of brown that's on this is about the color of the eyes. Just these bright, expressive eyes just looking at me. And like I still see them when I close my eyes at night. Sometimes I still see that face. I still see those eyes. And as I've grown, as I've aged, I've realized that the things that I saw in them, there was curiosity. There was probably amusement that this little hairless creature was huddled back in a corner and she just stuck her head right in the window. There was kind of the way that mothers, or since I became a grandparent, I've seen it in my own eyes, kind of the way that mothers or grandparents look at their children, or fathers, they look at their own kids. There was that kind of affection or love in it. So I'm staring up at this face, and this will happen a few more times over the years, in that time loses all meaning. I'm frozen. I can't tell how much time has passed. It could have been a few minutes. It could have been an hour that I was sitting there staring at her face. I just don't know. Then three things happened all at once. I knew that it was somewhere between 4:30 and 5 o'clock in the morning because I heard a train whistle. That was the Amtrak train coming through. It came through every morning at around the same time, between 4:30 and 5 o'clock. I heard a crack from down in the woods. As soon as that whistle, there was a crack, and then I was hit in the chest with something. It wasn't physical, but it was a sound. I was watching. I didn't know what it was. I tried for years to figure out what it was, and then I was watching a documentary with. Are you familiar with Jeff Corwin, the guy that does the animal videos? Okay, yeah. Jeff Corwin was in Africa, and a bull elephant came up on him and his camera crew, and it was rumbling. You could not hear it. The cameras didn't pick it up. Jeff Corwin said you couldn't hear anything, but you could feel it in your bones because it was sublingual. It was such a low rumble that the human ears couldn't hear it, but you could feel the vibrations. And that hit me in the chest. She pulled her head out of the window, turned around, and walked away. Now, I didn't know what I saw. Was it a monkey? Was it a gorilla? Was it something else? Was it a person that was just really hairy? I had no clue what I saw until maybe around Christmas time. And I was watching one of the local channels, and they had a rerun of In Search Of. And it was with Leonard Nimoy, and it was In Search of Bigfoot. And I saw Patty in the Patterson Gimlin film, and she was walking exactly the way this female was walking. Now I didn't see if she had any, I didn't see if she had a female chest or anything like that, because her back was to me, and all I saw close up was her face. But she turned around, walked back into the woods, and was gone. The next summer, Channel 43 out of Cleveland was airing a movie they called Sasquatch. It might have been the scripted documentary film with I can't remember who was in it, but they're up in British Columbia looking for a Bigfoot, and they're on horses, and they have the whole group. I saw that before I saw Boggy Creek. But that had the Bigfoot howl. They would the Sasquatch, oh, and that sounded just like the sirens from down at the dock company, and that freaked me out even more, that I didn't know which ones were sirens and which ones were howling. But yeah, so that was my first experience.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself there. So you said she pulled her head out of the window. Was there glass? Was she just at the window?
No, there was absolutely no glass in the windows. They were broken out long ago. I was lucky that there were floorboards that I was sitting on, because some of the floor was missing, and you could see the nails coming up and the joists for the floors. The whole thing was falling apart. The shed was just crumbling, but it was cool. I wanted to go play in it. Later, when I got a little bit older and I ventured through the woods and down the hill, there were the remnants of the brick Conneaut used to have a brick factory down by the creek. They have them they have some of the bricks at the Railroad Museum. The guy that lived down near there on the one side street, he had a big, huge garden, and he had bricks from there in his garden. So they were pretty famous in town. But there were ruins of that I wanted to go play in. So I loved crumbling things. But no, there was absolutely no glass. She just stuck her head through the window hole, and then she was bent over, I guess, because of the angle, and then she pulled her head out, turned, and walked away in one fluid motion.
Wow, really cool. So what happened when you got out of there?
I sat for a while, and I got out, and I didn't tell anybody. But I looked. I always looked to see, but the eyes kept peeping through the windows when I'd go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. They were in there. I never thought to look for any footprints or anything like that. We had a dog, Benji, my dad got from the shelter when we still lived at the lake, and they put him on the chain and on the back porch. And one day they said that he wrapped the chain. He used to bark at things in the woods. He used to bark at the woods all the time. And we thought, oh, it's a fox, or it's, something. It's a bird, or, whatever. He ended up with the chain wrapped around his neck several times, hanging off the porch. He died that way. And my parents thought, oh, well, he must have gotten wrapped up and tried to jump off the porch, the back porch. That dog never jumped off the back porch. Years later, I would read stories about how dogs were, if they were if they barked too much, that if they gave too much of a warning, that either they would be killed, or that something would try to bribe them with a bone or an animal carcass or something like that. So I think whatever it was just decided to kill Benji and didn't have my dog anymore. That was right after we first moved in. That was late 78, because we got my dog, Fricky, who was frisky, but my sister couldn't pronounce S's at 3 years old. So he became Fricky. We got him in 79, and he never went out on a chain. We didn't do it. We just took him out walking.
Yeah, we've heard that, and it's true. Dogs can alert to things that people aren't aware of. And Bigfoot, I guarantee you, does not like that. It's amazing to me that these creatures are around that area, just because I know the area. There's so much, I don't want to say it's so much going on, but there's just a lot of activity and people in that area for them to be that close to the town. Just really kind of makes me say, wow, I mean, these things could be anywhere,
Well, it's the railroad thing too. Railroads, and I've literally, I do not exaggerate when I say this, but I have literally watched over 10,000 Bigfoot videos. Now, a lot of them are the same video, the exact same video, just being analyzed by different people in the community. So I might have seen the same video 20 times with 20 different people looking at it, plus the original. But over 10,000 Bigfoot videos. And one of the things that people believe is that railroad tracks are like a Bigfoot highway. If you have a railroad running through the woods, that's easy passage, and there's woods on either side. It's easy to get out of the way. You hear the train coming. So there are railroads right there. The creek was right there next to the railroad. The two that go through town, you're probably not going to see them too much there, but the Bessemer tracks run through the woods and along the creek all the way out of town. The other thing is children, especially females, tend to be, from what I've read, the stories I've heard, tend to be attracted to children playing, laughing. They love children. They're very curious about children. It's a mammalian instinct. You hear about bears, or even lionesses. There are anecdotal stories about lionesses in Africa where a small child might be, going to be attacked by a hyena or something, and the lions protect it. The female lions. The male lion will just eat the thing, but females, mothers have that instinct. So there were a lot of kids living along the Bessemer tracks with backyards going down into it.
We know that Bigfoot travel rivers and creeks and stuff, but I've never really, I've thought about it, but I've never really made the connection. You're absolutely right. I bet you these things travel that railroad in and out of that area.
And
Uh,
easy food. Deer get
easy.
hit by trains all the time. That's an easy food source that they don't have to catch.
So maybe sitting on a railroad at night that has a lot less train traffic or none at
Mhm.
all, a guy might see something come walking by. You never know, huh?
Absolutely. And the second sighting, and my best friend saw this as well. It was my 12th birthday, 1986, March 11th. I had a birthday party at my house. All my friends from school came. I got a telescope. I love the stars. I have always loved the stars. I've seen things in the sky I can't explain. In the woods, were they orbs? Were they something else? I don't know. I can't explain it. But I've always loved the stars. My friends and I, when we, like, even in high school and after high school, we'd go walking in the middle of the night and lay down in the practice field at the high school, look up, and I'd point out the constellations and be like, those are the Pleiades, that's Cassiopeia, that's, that's Hercules. So I got a telescope. It was awesome. But it was still daylight. It's March. It's only about 5 or 6 p.m. It's not really getting dark. You can't look up at the sky. So we did the next best thing. Let's go down to the end of the street and look out over the creek. Now, I had lived, this is probably, let's see, Hayward, Marshall, Poplar, Nickel, about 4 blocks roughly from where I had my first sighting, my first encounter. Except for those 3 years, or those couple of years that we lived down at the lake, honestly, my entire life in Conneaut, whether I stayed at my grandmother's house or whether it was when I moved back to town for a year to stay with my sister, it was between the Conrail tracks and basically where State Street is. That's a total of maybe 6, 7 blocks north to south and about 2 blocks east to west. That rectangle is where I spent my entire life in that town. So we run down to the end of the street, the hill going down. Where this time I'm next to the Norfolk and Southern tracks. I'm on the south side of those tracks, and we go to use the telescope to look out across the Bessemer tracks across the creek at the woods. I'm looking, getting it all focused, and something huge, dark, and hairy goes running across my field of vision. I was like, what? What in the? My best friend nudges me out of the way. He goes, my turn. He looks through it, tracks a little bit, and then goes, what the heck was that? I'm like, you saw it too? Yeah, I saw it. What was that? We tried to find it again, but it was gone. And we come back to the house, look at my dad, and go, I think we saw a Bigfoot down there. There was something big and hairy running across. And he goes, because my father had an open mind about a lot of things, but there were other things that he would just, it was like a closed, completely and utterly closed. And this was one of them. And he says, well, it was probably one of the tall African American men down there fishing wearing a fur coat. He didn't say African American. He didn't use the N word to his credit. He said tall black men. I try to clean it up a little bit to not be insensitive. But yeah, basically, it's one of the tall black guys in town wearing a fur coat. He's down there fishing. This thing didn't have a fishing rod, and it was flying. It ran. That thing was trucking, I'll tell you what. But yeah, we'd have that experience with my father a couple times over the years.
Did you ever tell anybody later on about the shed incident?
Not really, not until I was an adult. And my friends and I were talking about different experiences that we had. in the woods, whether we were camping or whatever. And I was talking to my best friend, Ted, and he's like, remember when we were camping, when we saw this and this and this and this? And I was like, yeah, I didn't bring it up. He did, but I remember the same things. My friend Jimmy, we hadn't talked for almost 30 years. He had things going on in his life, and he just, as he said, he was kind of embarrassed about the things that were happening in his life. He didn't think anybody was going to understand. But we reconnected. My best friend since kindergarten. Would have been my best friend since Head Start, but he got kicked out for punching a kid in the face who ate his paste. Kid grabbed his paste, took it out, started eating it. Jimmy punched him right in the face, got kicked out of Head Start. It was the funniest thing in the world. I didn't even remember who he was, but then I met him in kindergarten. And his grandparents kind of adopted me. Now, this goes beyond the Bigfoot thing. There were, I won't go into details because like nobody needs to hear it, but bad things were happening to me as a kid. There was the bus driver from Head Start who convinced certain parents that if a kid's grandfather wasn't around, that they should hang out with Grandpa Ralph and go fishing down in the woods. Not a safe situation by any means. But when I met Jimmy, I would go to play at, he was living with his grandparents. He and his mom were living with his grandparents at the time. And Big Jim, his grandfather, saw something. He knew something was wrong. He and Jimmy's grandma adopted me, made me part of the family, and gave me a safe space to be. They said, the basement door is always open. You come in through the gate, you go down, you get yourself an ice cream bar, you get yourself a popsicle. It doesn't matter if we're home or not. If you need to be in the basement, come in the basement, stay as long as you need to. He never said why. He never explained why he offered that. He just offered it. That man was my hero. Oh, he was huge. He worked for the dock company for years, but he was just this big dude. Jimmy wasn't a small kid. He was probably 100 pounds in kindergarten, first grade. And Big Jim used to just hoist him up like he was nothing and put both of us on their shoulders. I started wearing hats because Big Jim always wore a hat. I'm bald now, but I still wear hats because of Big Jim. He had a heart attack working on the roof of the garage. We got home from school. There were ambulances there. We went over to the neighbor's house. First time I ever saw Jimmy cry. I was torn up. The ambulance could not get there because the house was in between the two railroads, and there was only one underpass. That was the one going north towards the lake. The underpass under the Norfolk and Southern tracks that lets you get to the hospital. And now I think there's a bridge that goes over the tracks out toward the hospital. But the ambulance couldn't get there. He died in the ambulance. There was nothing they could do. So his grandmother invited me to the funeral with all the grandkids. I didn't think I could handle it. I felt very uncomfortable. I was very, very socially awkward at that time. So I'm sitting there with my father, and Big Jim, when I was upset, would put his hand on my shoulder and squeeze. I'm sitting there at the funeral. I'm staring at the casket. I put my head down. I'm upset. I'm starting to cry, and I felt this big hand on my shoulder, and I felt it squeeze. I looked up into Big Jim's face. I quickly looked over at his wife, his widow now, grandma, Jimmy's grandma, and she looked at me, looked up at him, looked back at me, and smiled and nodded her head to say, yeah, I see him too. For years, we'd stay the night at somebody's house. If it was my grandmother's, if it was my house, Jimmy's house, Ted's house, wherever, I was the one that did all the cooking for breakfast the next morning because I learned how to cook when I was like 3 or 4. I started to learn how to cook. when we were at his grandma's house staying the night, playing video games all night or whatever, she would never let me cook. She said, "Nope, that's my job. Get back in there and play. You do not belong in my kitchen." It wasn't like, "Get out of my kitchen, you little brat." It was like, "We have this shared experience. I love you. I don't let my own grandkids cook. You're one of my grandkids. Get out." But she saw it. She never brought it up, never talked about it. But occasionally when we'd be sitting at her house playing or doing whatever, I'd see her looking at me and just kind of have this distant, wistful kind of look in her on her face, in her eyes. Um, and I think she was thinking about her husband and remembering what happened at his funeral. I didn't go to the cemetery because I couldn't bear seeing them put Big Jim in the ground. At like 7, 8 years old, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to handle watching a box with my hero being lowered into the ground.
Yeah, that's a tough situation for anybody, any child for that matter, to experience. Sorry you had to deal with that.
But
So where do you think, let's talk about the Bigfoot again. Where do you think these things were coming from? Where do you think they reside, I guess? Um, and are you still in that area? Do you still go to those places and look?
no, well, first in Conneaut, they would live out in Hogsback, um, Indian Hill Mound State Park is there now, or what do they call it? They call it Indian Mound State Park, I think they call it. We always called it Indian Hill. There was a fort there one time. Um, at one time, when the early settlers came in, somebody was digging under the fort and they found giant skeletons, perfectly, perfectly buried in lines, in rows, giant skeletons. There's also there's a tree, something, it's a nut tree that is very invasive. And I have Rose of Sharon where I live now that, God, if you don't get those, they grow so fast and they are so invasive. They get everywhere. But this nut tree, my best friend Ted says he has to constantly pull them out of his yard because they grow like wildfire. There are those trees that were surrounding where this fort was and where this graveyard was, this burial mound that had been pruned. Basically, the trees had been taken out. It was very well kept when they found it. There was another giant skeleton found down by where the viaduct is along the creek. If you look up on the Google Conneaut Giants, there's a story about it from an old magazine many years ago, when Conneaut was still called something else. But you've been to Conneaut, so you probably came in at some point on I-90 and then up Route 7 towards town. That's usually the way people come in. I go in 6N because it's easier for me coming from I-79 up from Pittsburgh way. In Erie, I just get off at Edinburgh, going that way. But along 7 to the east of Route 7 is a place called Hogsback, which is, I think we corrupted the word. Hogback is a hill with trees on it, trees on top of the ridge that looks like a hog's back. It looks like a razorback. They look like little hairs standing up on the back of the hog. It was always called Hog's Back. The creek was down there. Route 7 goes over the creek. We used to camp on the west side of that. There's woods that go further out. They can follow along the creek. They can follow along people's farmlands. So that's where they lived in town. I don't live up there anymore. I think they disappeared for a while, and moved further south when they tore up part of Hogsback to build the new elementary and middle schools out more towards I-90. My best friend still lives in Conneaut. He does YouTube videos where he walks in the woods, and he's had some really creepy experiences He's had a lot of rocks thrown at him. He's heard screams, he's heard howls, something knocked down a big tree when he was out in the woods not too long ago. So they are still in the area. But I moved south to Western Maryland. I'm in the mountains of Western Maryland. And the only sightings we have here are in Garrett County, which is the furthest west, around Deep Creek Lake. And those have all been fakes. Every single video I've seen, you can tell it's a fake. You can tell it's a hoax. We don't get many sightings where I live now.
Yeah, looking on a map here of Conneaut area, like you said, just to the east, it's pretty much the Pennsylvania state line, and then beyond
Mhm.
that is a little bit of. I mean, there's a good chunk of wooded area, uninhabited area there, where I can see them hanging out, walking along the railroad, like you said. But if you go a little bit south of there, I noticed there's state game lands number 101.
Mhm.
And it's a big area. It's in Pennsylvania, south of Erie, and it's a big area of woods that it's a state game land area. So that's interesting to me that that's there, and they could
Right along
easily,
this.
yeah, and they could
Mhm.
easily travel up north right there to the shore in that area
Absolutely.
east of Conneaut where there's a railroad
Cook
tracks. And,
Forest isn't too far,
yep.
in north central Pennsylvania. Right along the state line is Pymatooning State Park. That's a big lake, Pymatooning Lake.
Mm-hmm.
So that has tons of fish. If you ever back up in the area for the D-Day thing, take a drive south, go to Pymatooning Lake. They have what's called the Causeway. You could literally walk on top of the fish. There are so many fish that go down into the spillway. People used to get day old bread. They're trying to get away from using bread now and use like fish food or like kibble or something that's healthier for the fish. But like there are so many of them that fall down and can't get back up, you could literally walk across them. So plenty of food.
So what do you think these things are? I mean, if someone told you, I don't believe these things aren't real, they're not there. People aren't seeing these things. I mean, what are you going to say, and how do you
I
explain that?
I have two theories, and first, it's easier for me to tell you what I think they're not. Um, I don't think they're a hybrid between man and ape. I don't think that, some caveman got busy with a Gigantopithecus at one time in the distant past and produced an offspring, and he said, "Hey, I'm a Sasquatch. How are you?" I don't think, I don't believe, and I know this will upset a lot of people that have this theory. I do not believe that they are an interdimensional creature. I think that they have, the hair is like a ghillie suit, and it is very, very good camouflage. I think that they vibrate at maybe a different frequency than we do, which is why nobody can get a very clear picture unless they're standing absolutely still. I have a dog, a little dog. She's not big. She's a Schnauzer Shih Tzu mix. She's laying on the floor next to me. She always, when I come in the office here, she always lays right next to me. She does not like to have her picture taken. It'll look like she's laying still. Try to take her picture. She starts vibrating or shaking so imperceptibly that I can't see it with the naked eye, but the camera picks it up. The camera picks up that motion, and her pictures are almost always blurry. I think that they do the same thing. You, they start tensing up and shivering, and um, it screws with your camera. Now, what I believe they may be is either one, an extant species of Gigantopithecus. Over the last so-called 200,000 years, where these things have disappeared, um, they may have not necessarily evolved, but adapted to different environments. That's why there are so many different kinds of Bigfoot. It's only been, what, 40,000 years since we domesticated wolves into dogs. And you look at the size of a wolf, go to a zoo, look at the size of a timber wolf. They're huge. They're bigger than you think. And then you look at 40,000 years down the road, you've got a Chihuahua or a teacup Pomeranian. Those are tiny. That would never survive with a pack of wolves. But we did that. We changed them and it made the adaptations. So maybe Australopithecus, or not Australopithecus, Gigantopithecus did the same thing because of different environments. It grew, the fur turned white, the hair turned white to become a Yeti in the Himalayas. In the Pacific Northwest, they're taller because of all the food and the rainforests, like was it the Pleistocene, where we had the megafauna, the woolly mammoths and the giant sloths and the woolly rhinos and these rats that were as big as a cow. We had all these gigantic creatures. So maybe that happened. It was already big anyway. And then you look at Florida and Louisiana with swamp apes and skunk apes, and they look closer to the size of a gorilla or an orangutan. You look at the Southwest, they're very thin and not as tall, but still look like a Bigfoot. And they live in desert environments, and stories there have said that they're kind of sandy looking, so their fur changed to blend in. You've got the grassman or the wood booger in around the Great Lakes, where they're not the 12, 15 foot tall Bigfoot that people see in the Pacific Northwest, but and in the Appalachia, they're a good 9, 10 feet tall, but they instead of being solitary, they travel in groups. They have adolescents and infants and a couple of big males, a male that leads the pack, an alpha male, and a couple of sentries that guard the group. They have adult females that like big family units, because there's enough food, there's enough cover that they can move that way. The other thing that I think they may be is an extant species of hominin, like a caveman. Now, there are tales of giants in almost every society. There are giant bones that were found in Conneaut, in that area. There are giant bones that have been found all around the U.S. that supposedly, allegedly, the Smithsonian swooped in and said, we'll take care of these, and then hid them away in the archives, never to be seen again, because it would change history books. You could get into the religious aspect. Maybe they're the Nephilim. If angels fell from heaven and got with human women, the sons of God got with the daughters of Eve and had giant children, they were all wiped out by the flood. What would stop them from doing it again? Why wouldn't the angels go, I really like those human chicks. I think I'm going to go date one. Why wouldn't it happen again? It's a very real possibility to me that, maybe it is something of a religious aspect, or maybe it's just an extant species of caveman that, pre-human, proto-human, that was just exceptionally tall.
All of it makes some sense, I guess. Maybe one day we'll know. Who knows?
I'm hoping.
But, do you have anything else? Did you have any other things before we?
Oh, yeah. Well, in that area, we would go camping down by the creek along the Route 7 bridge, Old Mill Road. My friend Jimmy lived just up the road from that, just as you're starting to go up the hill south. And his mom used to sleep with a shotgun next to her bed and a pistol under her pillow. We asked her why. She said, or we asked Jimmy why, and he said, because there's something that comes at night and slaps the side of the house. Going back to the ghost that I was seeing Jimmy's grandfather next to me at his funeral, there was a little black shadow that would come from down upstairs, would run downstairs, run out into the kitchen. We were playing ambush, which is like hide and seek with an attitude. Basically, one person stares at a campfire, so his pupils are dilated, can't see in the dark. Everybody goes and hides. You get people on your team by tackling them. You find them, they hide in the woods, you tackle them, they're on your team, you announce it. You play until one person is left. That person gets to go out first with the person who was it. You start all over. Basically, it's called ambush because you can set traps for people. Playing ambush and camping, we would have I slid down the side of a hill toward the creek one time. I rolled over on my back, prickers all up above me, but I saw a thin female, not too tall, maybe 6.5 feet tall, walking between me and the creek. As she's walking, she turned her head, just like in the Patty film, turned her head to look at me, turned her head and shoulders, and just kept on walking down the creek. We would always take a big, it was like a 2 pound bag of powdered donuts for $1.99. What a deal back then in the 80s. But we would always blame it. That was our breakfast. We blame each other for eating all the powdered donuts in the middle of the night. My best friend Ted said several times he woke up with something standing over me, was seeing one of these creatures stand over me. One night he woke up to see one. It was an adolescent. It wasn't very tall, a juvenile, with our bag of powdered donuts, eating the powdered donuts and throwing the bag on the ground before walking away. There were rocks that have been thrown at us, rocks landing dead center in our campfire. We would hear screams that we thought was like a pheasant or a chicken being torn apart by a fox. That's the only thing we could figure out. Um, my best friend, when he was playing ambush with his church group, one reached out and tried to grab him while he was hiding. Um, I never felt unsafe in the woods. I went in the woods all the time alone. I know that I was followed, but I never felt unsafe. I credit that to that first female that I saw. Um, as she was walking away from me when I was like 6 years old, she made two sounds. She made like a whoosh sound and then an uck sound. So I always, in my head, her name was Whoosh-uck. She was telling me her name. But I think she protected me in the woods from all the other ones that would want to scare me out. I never felt unsafe until the time I did. We were in the woods, we were playing, we were walking through. We were going to go up and over a hill and then down the other side and over to Jimmy's house across the highway. Apparently, that's where they were nesting for the night because we saw probably a 10, 11-foot sentinel standing on top of the hill. We heard a crack. I looked up and froze. There was this thing standing there holding a branch that we went back weeks later to that tree and tried to measure the branch. And it was like 13, 14 feet high, the one he was holding on to, and shaking the crap out of this tree, just shaking it. I don't know who said run, but one of us did. One of us said run. It might have been all of us. We took off out of those woods. I don't know how long we stood there and stared at it. Could have been a couple minutes, could have been an hour. Again, time lost meaning. I lost time with this thing. That happened a lot in the woods. I lost time. I thought I was only in there for an hour and it was like an 8-hour day. But we ran. I didn't realize we went to my house first and talked to my dad and told him what we saw. And he blew it off and said, well, it was probably just a bear that wandered over from Pennsylvania. There weren't black bears in Conneaut at that time. We went back to Jimmy's. By the time I came back to know what was going on, we were laying on the floor at Jimmy's house underneath, so nothing could see us through the windows with all the lights off, barely breathing because we were so scared that we had to get back to Jimmy's. So yeah, that tons of experiences that knowing what I know now, it makes sense. Tree knocks. I had something, I heard what I thought was a gunshot and then thought there was a bullet flying over my head. I just thought it was somebody in the woods messing around. So I took off running. Now it could have been a tree knock and one throwing a rock over my head, going through the trees, going through the leaves. Things seen out of the corner of your eye. You see movement, you see a shape, a shadow, but you're not sure. The feeling of being watched. All of these things, just, now I don't believe in portals or being, an interdimensional creature. I do believe in mind speak. I don't think necessarily that it's them using telepathy. I think that they may do it through pheromones like other animals do. You can send fear, you can send comfort, you can send affection, all through pheromones in the animal kingdom. And if they're an extant species of Gigantopithecus, then they would have the ability to throw out pheromones to send messages.
Yeah, very interesting. Just like with the cloaking thing, that you were talking about. vibrations and all that. So maybe they just have, we as humans, we have our brains, right? That's our superpower. That's what's made us survive, is our brains. And maybe their superpower, or what they use, is their ability to do those things, to cloak, or to send the infrasound like you get hit in the chest. To do those things,
And it all makes sense from a biological standpoint. If you don't want to go into the whole ancient alien, Giorgio Tsoukalos thing with the wild hair, and it was aliens. I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. It makes sense from a biological standpoint that they would use pheromones, they would use camouflage, they would use, the vibrations that Daisy Ray uses to not get a picture taken because she's a brat. The sublingual. It just, to me, that makes a lot more sense than, believing every little thing. And real quick, I believe I've come up with a theory. There are 4 types of people in the Bigfoot community. There are non-believers. They're not going to believe regardless of what you say. There are skeptics who will believe with enough evidence. There are believers who will believe anything, even hoaxes. Oh, that's a big, think Matt Moneymaker from Finding Bigfoot, the way he is. That's a squatch. And then there are knowers. Knowers either have seen enough evidence to believe that they're real, or they've actually seen the creature. And knowers, as opposed to believers, want all of the evidence to be beyond reproach. So I'm a knower. I have a very healthy dose of skepticism. If I see a video that doesn't look right, I'm going to say it. I'm going to call it out. That gets me a lot of negative comments on the Bigfoot pages I belong to, but I don't care, because I want this to be scientifically beyond reproach. And you see a blob squatch. Oh, that's definitely a squatch. No, it's a tree trunk. Come on.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. 9 times out of 10, I'm not going to believe a picture or a video that I see. It's got to be really.
I get goosebumps.
We get a lot of pictures and videos sent to us.
I get goosebumps. Same goosebumps I saw watching the Patterson Gimlin film the first time. Same goosebumps I saw when that thing was right, when she was putting her head through the window. Same goosebumps that I got when we saw that thing shaking the tree. I get goosebumps if I watch a video that tells me this is probably real. I don't know why it happens like that. Maybe it's just my lizard brain going danger, danger, danger. I don't know.
Ken, it was awesome having you on the show, man, talking about your encounters and everything they're going on in Conneaut. That's crazy.
They're still happening. They're still happening. Like I said, my best friend has a video, or is on YouTube. And he does that. I think if you look up,
what's his channel?
It is T-Max, T-M-A-C, T-Max American Experience.
Okay. He
started off just doing hiking videos to get out and exercise when he retired from the military. He's always got his 9mm and his 10mm strapped to him when he goes out at night to do this. But he had a couple of weird experiences. And yeah, so now he does these Bigfooting videos at night, and some crazy stuff has been happening lately.
Okay. Have him reach out to us. We'll talk to him maybe.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you get out there and you see something else, you get it back a hold of us too.
Yeah.
The plan is to get to Salt Fork in Ohio, and to get back up to Conneaut and go out for a night investigation with Ted to see if I can experience something again. So,
yeah, Ohio's big for encounters in general. I never really thought about Conneaut area being a big
more sightings than any other state except Washington, I believe. It's got even more sightings than Oregon. Wow. According to the BFRO.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Map.
I think that's right. I think Oregon falls at number 5 or 4. I think Ohio's like 3 or something, like 2 or 3. Again, Ken, it was awesome having you on and talking to you about talking about Bigfoot.
Thank you, guys.
We appreciate it, man. You take care.
Again, stay in touch.
I definitely will. Thanks, guys.
All right. We'll see you later, buddy.